So starting out, what year did you graduate UF College of Medicine?
I graduated in 1979. So my year, what was then called the Junior Honors Program, was in 1975. So
Okay.
I think I was in the second class that went through the program.
Oh.
Back when we had it in what essentially was the fourth year of the person's curriculum, there was an overlap between the BS program and several of the first year medical school classes, on biochemistry and stuff. And then there was an opportunity for research. When it came around then to the first year of actual medical school, the empty slots that we had already filled, like in biochemistry, were available for research time. So it was a nice opportunity to do something a little different than in the mainstream. And then, of course, we were able to cut the year off of the overall education.
It just sounds like the wording is different.
I think it's a good program. I don't think it's for everybody. I really do think that the MHP students are the ones that are pre-selected to really be the cream of the crop, because the intensity is more than just general medical school, because you really have to cram in all the prerequisites, into the first 3 years. And that takes a level of commitment that you don't see in a lot of the other students that are in the medical school. They're very committed as well, but I think it's a level above.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. So what stands out to you when you think of your MHP year and kind of your time in MHP?
Well, I think it really molded me. My research opportunity was with Dr. Zornitzer, who later went on to become the director of research for the Navy. He had a very high position, and it was in neuroscience, and we were studying the effects of various lesions in mice, regarding their memory and learning. My involvement then was to develop a mouse model for stroke, for very discrete strokes, that involved very precise surgery on the mouse brain. After doing that, I guess I kind of decided I liked brain surgery. That ultimately started me down the path to become a neurosurgeon. So I think that program was very influential. Many doctors, as you'll see, kind of sample a number of different specialties during their training. A lot are not decided as to what they want to do. And it is a different experience if you are targeting a specific specialty right from the get-go. So I think it helped point me in that direction.
Okay. What's your favorite memory with MHP when you think back to your classmates and just going through all that together?
We had a few parties. Just the camaraderie. We remained a bit of a social circle. When you have a medical school class of 100 people, I don't know how many they have at UF now in the medical school classes, but I think it's probably in the ballpark of 100 people.
Yeah, somewhere around there, I believe.
Yeah, so that's too big of a circle of friends. You don't really form that many close relationships, so there naturally are these kind of coagulations or aggregations of smaller groups within the larger group. When you first start out in a class that big, it can be a little overwhelming, because people are coming from all over. And so the fact that we had kind of a cohesive group right from the beginning, I think, was a bit of a social buffer for us. Of course, as time went on, we sort of brought new people into the group, and people kind of left and joined other groups. But it was nice to have sort of a group of close friends, starting out.
Yeah, that's definitely an aspect I like about our class, because it's only 11 people. So it's really small. And especially with COVID, going into medical school with that group that I already know, when we're probably not going to be able to have a ton of social situations with everyone. It's definitely something that is very important to me.
We had a dozen in my class. I can't imagine how difficult it must be with the COVID now, and how disruptive that would be for classes, particularly the ones that involve, laboratory work.
A lot of them are strange. For some of the labs, they tried to convert them online as well as they could. So last semester I finished up Physics 2 lab, and they literally mailed you a box of supplies, and you would like do the labs at home.
Wow.
And then it was weird. And then for some of the other labs, there's like limited spots. So like organic chemistry lab where they can't casually mail you the supplies.
Mhm. How does that work now? You know, I remember organic chemistry, the climax of that was synthesizing luminol and mixing it up in the dark and watching the test tube glow. Uh, do you still have the hands-on organic labs and things like that now?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay,
It's
cool.
just spread out now. And you don't have a lab partner, so you can't like really coordinate with the other people in the lab. And then they test us every 2 weeks if you have anything on campus for COVID.
So how many
Yeah.
times have you been tested now?
3 or 4, I think.
Wow.
Yeah. But they're doing the spit test. So they
Okay.
literally have like a drive-through in the parking garage, and you just drive through and they give you the little test tube, and then you park and you spit in it, and as you drive out you turn it in.
Sounds efficient.
Exactly. So you kind of started to touch a little bit on your career after UF College of Medicine with neurosurgery and everything, but can you give a little bit more background on where you went after UF and what all you did?
Sure. Well, actually, I just kind of never left. When I was going through medical school, because of the research here, I knew a lot of people in the Department of Neuroscience. Many of them worked closely with the Department of Neurology and with neurosurgery. As I was finishing up, the chairman of the Department of Neurosurgery, Dr. Roden, offered me a position, you know, as a neurosurgery resident, which I accepted because the program is clearly one of the best in the world. And I considered it quite an honor. So that automatically gave me a place in the general surgery. I did my general surgery at UF and then did my neurosurgery residency. And at that point, as I was finishing up, he said, "How would you like to be on the faculty?" So I said, "Well, sure, you know, that'd be great." You know, so I joined the faculty then. And I taught for 5 years. I had appointments in departments of neuroscience, neurosurgery, and electrical engineering.
Oh wow.
I worked with some electrical engineers to develop processes for automating the analysis of EEG. And I had my own research lab where I was studying in vitro brain slice electrophysiology in humans and animals. So we could take little portions of the brain and keep them alive in the laboratory and study their electrophysiology, you know, what the individual neurons do, what the networks of neurons do. I developed the epilepsy surgery program there at the university. It was very interesting. That was involved, you know, a number of awake craniotomies where we would directly stimulate parts of the brain, you know, to map areas out to determine what we could resect and what we couldn't. And of course, that served as a source for the human brain material for in the laboratory work. There's a treatment for epilepsy called vagus nerve stimulation. I was in on the very ground floor of that. I published the first paper on this surgical technique for the implantation of the stimulator, and I ran the neurosurgical division of the VA hospital. In those years, I was president of the Epilepsy Foundation of Florida. Really focused at that time on seizure surgery and epilepsy and some of the administrative stuff that we're running the program at the VA. Then after that interval in 1990, I decided to go into private practice. I stayed in Gainesville and kept a relationship with my friends at the university. I just remained in private practice as a solo for several years, and then I joined a large multi-specialty group practice, stayed with them for several years before I retired. And now I started Doctor Lifeline because over the course of my career, I've known many, at least 5 physicians very personally that I knew killed themselves. And my father, who was not a physician, also took his own life. So I felt that I still had something to contribute to the world here, to make a difference. And that my level of understanding of that particular problem was probably better than most. So I thought, what can I do about this? And that was why I started Doctor Lifeline.
I'm sorry to hear about your father and any
Well, it's
close
a
friends.
much more common problem than people think, and it's everybody goes sometime, and some people choose the time and place when they're going to die, and others, just leave it to nature, and it's just part of the overall human condition. It's something that most of the people who made serious attempts and who have survived them later say that they were glad that they failed. So it's worthwhile, and I believe there's situations where it may be a perfectly rational and appropriate decision for someone to make. They're making it under conditions of unbearable stress, or torture or something like that. When the situation can be changed, then I think it's not the right choice, and we need to do what we can to alleviate those situations.
And so, what exactly is your mission with Doctor Lifeline? You've kind of touched on it a little bit.
The mission is to prevent physician suicides. There are roughly 400 U.S. physicians who take their lives every year, and it may be getting worse with the COVID scenarios now. It's actually extremely difficult to get statistics on the actual numbers for several reasons. Some of which include, deliberate misclassification. A lot of times, doctors are close friends with the medical examiner. And there may be reasons that the medical examiner who knows the doctor's family might misclassify the death, for insurance purposes or something. Or maybe they don't want to embarrass the family. Other situations, the doctors are very clever. They have ways of killing themselves that may not appear to be a suicide. So that 400 number is probably a serious underestimate of the actual number. Those are the ones who can be pretty sure actually did kill themselves. So the traditional approach has been to blame the doctor, say, it's just too bad that guy didn't have what it takes to be a surgeon or to be, an orthopedist or whatever. That guy, emergency doctor, he just wasn't cut out for it. He didn't. He was deficient. He didn't have the grit and the drive and the stamina to do it. If it was a case of a resident or a medical student who killed themselves after getting chewed out by a superior, the blame has often been placed directly on the physician as having some kind of deficiency. It's my position, Dr. Lifeline's position, that the problem is much more systemic, that we're faced with incredibly toxic workplace environments where we suffer from a number of psychic insults, basically. 3 big areas I think that we need to focus on are burnout, learned helplessness, and moral injury. The other aspects are secondary, and many of them are directly correlated with those. The burnout I mentioned first just because it's the most recognizable, and people kind of understand what that means. Of the 3, it's the one that's had the most attention, and that's where the doctor loses interest in the workplace. They become less effective. They're more likely to make mistakes. The term originally applied to end-stage narcotics addiction. People would say that this guy's burned out, come in with needle marks and everything. And back in the 70s, it started to be applied to doctors, and it kind of stuck. Area of learned helplessness, I think, is where the most bang for the buck is going to be found in correcting this. Learned helplessness is a phenomenon that was discovered by Martin Seligman, who is he's kind of the father of positive psychology. In psychology, there kind of was a stagnant period back in the 50s through the 70s where it was dominated by behaviorism. And the focus of psychology up to that point had been to deal with mental illnesses. What do we do when things go wrong?
Mm-hmm.
Or their psychology isn't adaptive, it's not working right. What Seligman did was he came along and he asked the question, well, maybe we should be studying what it's like when things go right, when people are happy, and he gives the analogy, you can have a garden and you can go out there and you can pull the weeds out of the garden until your heart's content. And once all the weeds are gone, all you've got is dirt, He said, but if you're planting flowers and seeds and fruits and things, then you've got a nice garden. So he pointed out that the field was, doing only half of its potential by looking just at the pathological kinds of psychological pictures. He started out with an experiment where he would take dogs or rats and place them in a chamber that had a small barrier in the middle that the animal could easily jump over.
Mm-hmm.
And it had an electrical grid on the floor and a light with a buzzer. And the way the experiment was carried out was they would take the animal and place it in a chamber and restrain the animal. They would flash the light or the buzzer and then give the animal an electrical shock. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
it was unpleasant. And then they had another group of animals where they would do the same thing, only they would not restrain the animal. The animal could escape to the other chamber. So what he found was that the animals that were initially restrained, when they would repeat the test unrestrained, would just sit there in the chamber and receive the foot shock and suffer with it rather than jump over the barrier. Even if they saw other dogs escaping or other rats escaping the shock, they would just sit there and whimper. So he coined the term learned helplessness. The situation was inescapable. The good news was he found that if he actually physically lifted the animal from one chamber into the other chamber, that it then learned that it could escape the situation and then in the future would.
Mm-hmm.
There was an analogous kind of series of experiments. I forget offhand who the researcher was, but it was very interesting. This could never be done today. This was done back in the 50s or the 60s. But what they did was they took rats and they put them in these cylinders where there was a water jet coming down. Mm-hmm. So if the rats stopped swimming, the water jet would push him down and he would drown. And what they did was they would take rats and put them in this chamber, and
Mm-hmm.
Typically it took something like 60 minutes. The rat would swim and swim and swim and then give up or get blown down and die. And then what he did was he took some of these rats and put them in that situation, so they're right up to the point where they were going to drown, and he would save them. Okay, he'd kind of resuscitate the rat and wake back up again, and then he put it back in that situation. Same thing. And this time the rat would swim for sometimes 50 hours.
Oh my goodness.
Because evidently the rat knew that there was some hope.
Mm-hmm.
And he still let him drown. But anyway,
Oh no.
but the fact that there was some hope there made all the difference. And what we're finding in practice situations for doctors is many times they confront so many issues on which they're unable to effectively make a change. Okay, and so they kind of adopt the helplessness position because there's only so many times you can approach administration and tell them that your department needs something, and they turn you down, or there's only so many times you could accept unwarranted criticism. You complain about it, nothing changes. Or if you're in a financial situation, your patient needs a procedure and it's emergent and you have to do it to save their life. And then insurance company says, well, this wasn't pre-authorized. We're not going to pay you. After a while, you don't even bother sending them the bill because it just seems to be futile. And there are countless situations like that are encountered over and over again in practice, in and out, feel that they're unable to change that environment, that they're stuck there, that there's no hope. And I really think that that's probably the leading cause of physician suicides. And so the main thrust for Doctor Lifeline is identifying those kinds of factors. Electronic medical records are one of them. They're terrible. They isolate the doctor from the patient, and they force the doctor to lose any creativity in the diagnostic process. If the disease doesn't correspond to a box you can check, then as far as the administrative role of medicine is concerned, it doesn't exist. So there's no room for creativity there. If you want to come up with a good treatment for that patient, you've got some great ideas. You could change the whole field, but you can't do that. We're not going to authorize that. You can't use that medicine for that disease because right here in this table, there's no check mark there. So those kind of frustrations are things that we work to mitigate. The last of the big three is moral injury. Moral injury is a situation where a person is forced to do something that they know is not right. There's a lot of that in medicine. You may have to deny a treatment to somebody because your insurance won't authorize it. Or you have a patient that you know has no hope to live, no chance at all for that patient to survive. But the family is demanding that you do everything. You're then in a bind. If I don't do everything for them, they're not going to be satisfied. They're going to sue me. But this is a waste of resources. We may just be prolonging the person's suffering. So there are a lot of situations like that doctors find themselves in, where there's a conflict between their own moral compass and the overall system as to what the right thing is to do. Any doctors are never able to reconcile those kind of issues. We're working on ways to kind of mitigate that problem too. As far as advice for anyone that's starting out, at this phase of your, so you're in the MHP first year now, right? Okay, so you're at that interface year. At this point, you're near the top of your game. You have been identified as being the cream of the crop. You're among the best of the best. The one purpose of that program that I believe, I have no evidence for this, but it's my belief, is that it is a net to scoop up the best and the brightest from the undergraduate classes, because the best students that you can get into your medical school college, that's going to be your reputation as a college. You want to have the best students you possibly can get, and you don't want those really great students to go off to other medical schools. So I really think that one of the purposes of the MHP is to identify and capture those exceedingly good students. So you're part of that, and that's a nice place to be. So you're coming along. You're on the top. Here you're the best. Then you're going to come into your big class, where all of a sudden everybody that's there is really, really smart too. Now you've been mixed in with a group where before you were probably the smartest one in the room all the time, and now you may still be, but you may be average. You may even be below average in that group, because all of those people had to do really well to get there too. Chances are you're smarter than they are, because their medical schools probably would have tried to scoop them up too if they could have. That's a bit of a culture shock. Suddenly you may not be the smartest person in the room going through. And then as you're going through the preclinical courses, you're going to be primarily instructed by basic scientists who each believe that their field is the most important thing in the world. And when you have your histology class, that's going to be, histology is the most important thing, or immunology, or, as you go through all of these, your professors are personally convinced that their field is going to be the most important to your career of anything you're going to learn. So, but they're competing for your time.
Yeah.
So right there, you can confront a little bit of a moral injury problem. Is how do I assign my time? I want to make this professor happy. I want to make that professor happy. And everything. And then out of all of this information, what's really going to be important to me as a doctor?
Mm-hmm.
How do I know that this isn't just some esoteric research thing that this guy is particularly interested in because he's about to present it at a national meeting?
Mm-hmm.
And how does that relate to my practice of medicine in the future? And the point is, you can't know. You can't know out of all that information that you're going to be asked to absorb what's important and what isn't, because you don't have the clinical background, because that comes later. So then as you go further on and you start your clinical rotations, the only person lower on the rung from the medical student is the intern. Okay, so in the kind of sociology of hospital dynamics, everyone in the hospital hierarchy, from the janitor to the administrator, knows that there's no one lower than the intern. So you're going to be there trying to help the poor intern while learning at the same time, and you're going to be making clinical rounds with residents at various levels of the hierarchy, and with the attending in the service, and they're all going to want to demonstrate their proficiency and their knowledge, and one way they do that is by pointing out to you what you don't know. And in many cases, that can be very humiliating. So you have to kind of steel yourself against that and know that this is kind of a tradition that's baked into medical education. They call it pimping the med students. They'll ask you things, that there's no possible way you could know. And when you don't know it, they demean you and say, well, God, everybody knows that. So you have to be ready for that. If you don't know it's coming, you could take it very personally, and it could be very harmful. When you finish medical school, then you're again kind of near the top of your game. It's so gratifying to get your diploma, and then you start out as your internship, and then you're back lower than you were before.
You're
right?
back down, yeah.
And then you go back through the various levels of your residency. And when you finish, you think you're done, but then most of the specialties require at least 2 examinations. The second one usually is after a couple of years of actually being in practice. Where in many of the specialties, you have to present data from your practice to them and take an additional test. And then there may even be, in your specialty, a maintenance of certification requirement where every 5 or 10 years you have to prepare and take another test. Every time you think you've made it and you're finally there, there's something else. So the one way you can help to prepare yourself for all of that is to have what's called a battle buddy. Okay, make a good friend with someone who is going through the same kind of situation, and tell them from the very beginning. There's this guy, Dr. Reid, he gave me this advice a long time ago. But, if you make a good friend, and you each realize, that you're going to be facing these challenges, which can really be overwhelming, and just promise to be there for each other. Have someone that you can talk to, because this whole resilience culture in medicine is still still there, and where if someone seeks help, if they realize that they're struggling and they need to have a discussion with somebody, but they're reluctant to do it because, number one, it's a sign of weakness. They don't want their colleagues to think that there's something wrong with them, that they're inadequate in the position. Number two, many times people justifiably fear if they're seriously depressed over these issues, that they might need some psychiatric treatment, and that could interfere with their continuing education or career path, or that it could get them labeled in a way that they wouldn't be able to find a job in the future, or that they might not be able to get health insurance. There were the reasonable concerns why doctors don't seek help when they need it, because there are systems that are set up that can actually capture the damaged doctor in a scenario that they literally can't escape from. So these physician health programs that are kind of evolved from addiction programs are notorious for capturing physicians and not letting them go. Basically, you have to keep coming back to this program. After a 3-month in-house treatment program, you need to come back every week. And every time you come back, it's going to be another $500. There are programs like that around, and in many cases, they're allied with medical boards, and to maintain your license, if you get into one of those, you're stuck. And that's one of the things we're trying to change too. That we believe that a physician shouldn't suffer throughout their career, because they need psychiatric treatment for one particularly stressful point of it. But, so the battle buddy concept, I think, is a really important one. Another really important one that's very difficult to attain is work-life balance. You have to set aside time to recharge. It has to happen. Because of the changes that happened before you came on board, the residents are now limited to an 80-hour work week.
I believe so.
Back when I was a resident, it wasn't unusual to put in a 100-hour, 120-hour work week. For a year and a half, I was on call every other night, no vacation. The longest I had to stay awake and actually be working was 72 hours continuously awake.
Wow.
I can tell you at the end of that time, I was hallucinating like crazy.
I bet.
Yeah, it was just the loosest associations, between things, the sounds and things. It was just really bizarre. There's been tremendous improvement in that area, but it's still bad. 80 hours a week is a long time to be working.
Yeah, that's still a huge chunk.
So you somehow have to find a way, if you're offered vacation time, make sure you take it. A lot of times it's just offered on paper, and practically they consider it a sign of weakness to ask for your vacation. The other thing is the power of no. You have to be willing to say no and accept the consequences. Because if you don't learn how to say no, you will get used up. They will absolutely extract every bit of labor from you that you possibly can give. You need to learn how to say no, be able to justify it, and live with the consequences. Because if you don't, you literally get eaten alive by the system. So that's my advice for anybody in your position going forward. It's a great place to be, though. You're in the noblest of all the professions, and if you fight to keep it as an art, don't let them turn it into a trade. Don't let them turn you into a technician. Remember, you know more about your field than any administrator, than any legislator, than anyone who wants to exert control over you and tell you what you have to do. You, as a physician, seeing that patient at that moment in time, are the best informed and best motivated person to make those decisions. Learn how to protect your head with those things. Let me answer any of the questions that you have now.
Oh, no, I think you covered a lot of them, and it was a really good explanation of some of the different factors. And I found it really interesting when I was going through your website, like before this, and when writing the questions and everything. Situations that I've heard about and almost just seem accepted, but how detrimental they can really be.
There's a lot of that out there. People are beginning to recognize it now. So I think we're spinning the wheels a little bit, but we're starting to get some traction. Overall, it's going to make a difference.
So one of the statistics I saw on your website was how much higher of a rate there are of female physician suicides versus male. And I was wondering if you could go into some of the reasoning that you think is behind that.
That's an interesting question. I think a lot of it has to do with the way the roles have been perceived traditionally in this country. Medicine has been a male-dominated field.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if you know, actually, our most recent medical school class is like 53% women. Like, it's the first time that there's more women than there are men.
Well, that's a definite trend. Then that's good. In other countries, the traditions have been different. Like in Russia, there's a long tradition of female physicians, being in higher positions and so forth. So I think anyway that there are some prejudices and biases against women in medicine, and some fields are worse than others.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I was a neurosurgery resident, at that time, we had a resident in our program. Her name is Lucy Love. She's a neurosurgeon in Tampa now. But at that time, she was one of 5 neurosurgery residents, females in the country. There were only 5.
Wow.
As it is now in neurosurgery, I believe that the statistics are still pretty slanted. I think there's like 18% of neurosurgeons, I think, are women. So in some fields like orthopedics, it may be worse.
Mm-hmm.
In that situation, it might be explainable by the physical strength that's required for some of the procedures. Or to operate some of the instruments. They have to actually be pretty forceful. And maybe
Mm-hmm.
justifiable on that grounds. But so there's the good old boy network kind of theory, which probably has some validity. I think that there are kind of sadistic people, sociopathic people in medicine that enjoy making people suffer, and then they victimize some of the women, and they may pick on a woman particularly. I've actually seen that happen where I'm not going to give you specifics as to which field or anything it was, but I can tell you it happened right there at UF, where this very promising resident was selected by a particular attending, basically to get crushed, and he made her life a living hell, for no apparent reason. Sadly, that kind of thing can happen.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that the best response to that, though, is to shine the light on it when it's happening. And I think that there may be a bit of a spin-off from the Me Too movement, that now I think people are more willing to listen to complaints from women on the broader scale, not just sexual harassment and so forth. That they may be willing to that. But that's another issue. There may be sexual harassment. There may be inappropriate requests. The whole field is rife with these dominance, submission kind of hierarchies. Where there is this clearly established power differential. Where some people have much more power over others. They can make or break your whole career. And then there are people who don't ethically wield that power.
Mm-hmm.
A woman physician finds herself in a situation that she feels she cannot escape from. We're right back to the learned helplessness situation. The only way out may appear to be suicide. So I think that may be why we see that skewing in the numbers with more female suicides than male suicides in the medical profession.
Okay, that makes sense. It kind of sounds like some other issues kind of make the fundamental problems that are there worse.
Precisely.
Do you think the medical field is open to making the changes needed to correct these problems and these statistics that we're finding?
Frankly, I don't think the system wants to change. The system needs to change, but there's a tremendous inertia. Right now, there are perverse incentives for keeping the system the way it is. hospitals don't want to see their control over their physicians diminished. They benefit from their ability to extract unreasonable amounts of labor from their doctors.
Mm-hmm.
The appalling demands of some of the electronic medical records on physicians are just absurd. Literally, doctors spend more time entering data at the electronic medical record than they do taking care of the patient. And that doesn't benefit the patient, that doesn't benefit the doctor. Who benefits from that use of their time? The insurance companies, the hospital administrators, the various bean counters, the one that collects statistics and things. So there's this vast sea of irrelevant information. And this is another part of the moral injury part. The doctor knows he's not doing the right thing for the patient. He could be seeing more people and actually helping them rather than making some, statistician's job easier down the line. The system doesn't want to change. It's happy with, things are working for it now. The right people are getting rich. That's another thing we need to work on. And frankly, I'm not sure what the best chink in that armor is going to be to attack. I'm hoping that making people aware of it. A lot of times they're living in those environments, they don't even realize what's happening to them. Raising awareness is one thing, and I'm hoping to be able to identify specific areas that we can really focus on to kind of break that system open. Frankly, I've not been successful with that yet.
If there's a medical student or a doctor who's reading this newsletter with the interview and everything, and they're struggling with mental health right now, what would your advice to them be?
Talk to somebody. Talk to your friends. Talk to your battle buddy if you have one. Realize that there are lots of ways out of this situation. To respond to an oppressive situation by becoming depressed or feeling bad is normal. That's not a pathological human response, and that these things can create mental illness, they can create depression, they can put you in a place that's really dark and bad. But there are lots of ways out of those places. You just need to ask for help, and it's okay to ask for help. I personally would be happy to talk to anybody locally that faces those issues. They can contact me through my website. I know psychiatrists that can make referrals for people if they feel that it's at a level that needs that. There's a national suicide helpline available, and I think starting later this year or early next year, there's going to be a 3-digit suicide emergency number that you can call. That's going to be a big help, I think. Realize, at your core, you're extremely valuable. It's worth it. And if you have to suffer through it a little bit longer, or if you have to be a little bit embarrassed, or it's worth it. You're important. You gotta hang in there. You can help a lot of people. The world needs you. Don't exit it prematurely.
Well, I greatly appreciate you answering all these questions. Is there anything else you want to add?
If you could do anything you can to help us promote the message, if you know of anybody that needs a speaker at a meeting of any kind, or if you have an opportunity to promote our website, or again, I'm available. I'll be happy to talk to anyone that's interested to hear what I have to say. That's really all all I can ask. Just anything that we can do to help get the word out and maybe get some volunteers involved.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a good day. The newsletter will make its way to your email once we've compiled everything from the semester and all of that, but you'll definitely get a copy.
Okay, thank you. And feel free, if you want to use any segments of this discussion, if you feel like making a video or anything like that, or for your colleagues.
Okay. You
have my permission to do so. You can just keep me in the loop if you do that, so I can maybe make a link to it, on our website.
Okay.
Yes, please. Really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Well, good luck in your career.
Thanks.
If you have time and you remember it, and I'm still alive by the time you get through your residency, drop me a line. I'd love to hear from you and see how things turned out for you.
I will.
Okay. God bless. Take care now.
You too. Bye.
Bye.